I just want to say thank you for each and every one of you for participating into this panel. This is VBS, the Virtual Blockchain Summit. Welcome to all of you from Canada, from United States, from Europe, and around the world. I'm Adrian Sischin, coming to you live from Calgary, Canada, and presenting you, moderating today's topic for the panel scheduled for this section of the day. That deals with legal and regulatory compliance. On the Virtual Blockchain Summit is the first worldwide tokenized event. And let me get started by introducing some of our awesome speakers today. We'll start with you, Tanya. Tanya Woods, it's the Managing Director of the Canadian Chamber of Digital Commerce in Canada. Jason Dearborn, it's the co-founder of Romanian Bitcoin mining, and Tudor Stanciu from the Romanian Fintech Association. Welcome all of you, and thank you for investing your time to be here today with us. And I would like to just leave it up to you to probably mention a couple of elements about yourself and some of the projects you are working. Your credentials are impressive and they are available on the website, and you know, people can hook up with you on LinkedIn. But maybe you want to go and introduce yourself and present some of the projects that you are working. So Tanya, why don't you go first?
Thank you. So yes, I'm the head of the Chamber of Digital Commerce Canada, Canada's first blockchain trade association. I'm also the founder of Project In Kind, which is a global philanthropic movement to inspire global in-kind giving. And so that would be donations of time, services, and goods in support of the UN SDGs and our local and global communities. So I'm delighted to be here, certainly during this interesting time. We're all experiencing it differently, no doubt, around the world. It's a pleasure to be able to leverage some of my favorite things like blockchain and technology with doing good, which I think we can, you know, many of us resonate with the importance of right now. So thank you very much for having me.
Thank you. Thank you for joining us, Tanya. Jason?
Thank you, Adrian, and thanks, Tanya. It's wonderful to be back here. It's a shame that we're not in Bucharest again. I was just saying before we came on live, it was my first time to Bucharest last year, speaking in this amazing building. And for anyone that hasn't visited, it completely exceeded all of my expectations. The city was wonderful. The people were wonderful. And post-COVID, I'll definitely be going back. I'm coming to you live today from Brecknock Farm, which is exactly 5 hours as the crow flies east of Adrian in Calgary, but in Saskatchewan. DBMC, or Dominion, is amongst Canada's oldest blockchain companies. We're founded in 2013. We have a couple of divisions now. We're dealing with cryptocurrency custody and other digital asset custody that are using blockchain platforms. And we also are providing some blockchain solutions into the agricultural industry with the upcoming launch of a transportation app called Go Grain, which we're currently in development with for Western Canadian farmers first, but we know that it has some global connotations. Our company, Dominion, is in the process right now of going global, and we're hoping to list in public Q4 of this year. We have investment officers in Geneva, compliance officers in Tampa, Florida, people from across the country. We work closely with others in the industry, servicing our clients to purchase crypto with BitConnect from Calgary, and as an example. And so it's a wonderful industry. And really, this is a poignant panel, because the constraint in the industry has not been the technology. It has absolutely been the regulations and the legal catching up. I am a former two-term provincial legislator who would be in charge of the securities laws in our country. And so I'm very thankful that we can bring this forward. I've had the opportunity in Canada to present as far back as 2014 to the Parliament of Canada, Senate Committee on Banking and Finance, and in 2018 to the Standing Committee on Finance for the House of Commons, trying to move the regulatory agenda for our space forward in an open and transparent manner. And we're farther along than we were, not really in the legislation, but in the actual practice and the way that our businesses are evolving. Thank you, Adrian.
Thank you, Jason. And now up to Tudor from Europe, from East Europe, from Romania. If you want to introduce yourself and a couple of things about the projects.
Thanks a lot, Adrian. I'm really glad to be here to see the dimension of the event and all the geographies involved. Briefly, I'm involved in two projects. First of all, the Romanian Fintech Association, which is one of the newest fintech associations in the European Union. It was founded at the beginning of this year. It's what we like to call an entrepreneurial professional association because its members are fintech startups and scale-ups that are building their own products, which involve proprietary technology, because we want to create some momentum in this region of Europe towards building product and moving the economy from a services economy to a product and a tech product economy. So I'm serving as the interim president for this initial year of the association's activity. And we're focusing a lot this year on interacting with the authorities, not only at the national level, but also at an EU level. In that context, the Romanian Fintech Association is a founding member of the European Digital Finance Association, which is a body which aims to basically put in touch even the smallest startups and scale-ups in the space of fintech with the European Commission, with the European Parliament, to basically give a voice to all the entrepreneurs which are coming into this space and are trying to bring a change to financial services and to innovate in this space. And my background is as a lawyer. For the past 4 or 5 years, I've been working exclusively with startups and scale-ups which are building their own products in the technology space. I'm doing it as part of a team called Digital to Law, where we're basically trying to build a legal organization that is not only focused on providing services for startups, but is also aiming to use the experience of seeing similar problems with the clients that we're working on to develop a certain technology products of our own in the space of compliance. So we started with some iterations in the space of GDPR, in the space of privacy. And I think these two aspects, the fintech part and the compliance part, are those that basically connect the topic of the panel and the idea of legal and compliance in the blockchain, in the cryptocurrency space, in the digital asset space, because I think you cannot have an evolution of this space without taking into account the financial services part and the compliance part. So I'm really, really happy to be here in this panel.
Well, thank you for joining us. So I couldn't help by noticing that Tanya was smiling when you mentioned that you are a lawyer. Especially because I know that she's a great lawyer, and then the topic is ultimately about the legal and regulatory compliance. But Tanya, I would like to kind of go a little bit beyond the actual nitty-gritty of the compliance that we all know that it's so much different from every single jurisdiction. And here in Canada, we're blessed to have quite a few, as provinces have their own jurisdictional aspects to it. And try, also in line with what Tudor was mentioning, to kind of identify in a space where things are evolving so rapidly, and it seems like the technology is not able to catch up. How would you find ultimately the right thing to do, the ethical thing to do, the good thing to do, and probably the kind thing to do as you move and you develop certain products?
You know, and that's a great question, Adrian. Thank you. And of course, I always smile when I see fellow lawyers, and especially when they're not in traditional paths. It's really interesting to me. So, look, we focused for the last little while on AML and securities applications when we talk about regulation and blockchain. But blockchain is not just tokens or cryptocurrency. Blockchain is a framework where we can have value exchanges. And the compliance benefits or conversations or the regulatory conversations, we're at this very pivotal moment, and I think we've been sort of stuck in it for a while, waiting for it to happen, that we need to move beyond the securities only conversations, because there is so much value to be tracked and mobilized across blockchains and leveraging the technology. And regulation needs to go with that, and policies need to go with that. Maybe it's not regulation applied. Maybe it's just regulators considering what their role could be, if there is a role, and deciding whether they have one or not. Maybe it's simply that. When you look at the transactional nature of blockchain technology, it does facilitate value transfer. Now, when it can be the ultimate bearer of validated truth, then I think we must think bigger about how it needs to be considered and in what applications. Certainly, I do think a lot about adjacent applications, so global aid payments, in-kind donations, impact investing. How does all of that work when we start to embed blockchain technology and tokenized technologies across different verticals? How can blockchain and regulatory and compliance work together in public policy making, democratic participation? I know Jason and I have had many conversations around voting, but also right now, when we're looking at how countries are handling COVID response, compliance frameworks leveraging blockchain technology, frankly, have a huge role and a benefit to offer, and they're not being deployed yet because too many people are still intimidated, frankly, I think, by the technology. So we need to expand our conversations on regulatory and compliance. I believe in order to do that, we need government to work very closely with our blockchain innovators, to approach the situation with humility, to be having a, the growth mindset. Adrian, you and I always talk about growth mindset, having a growth mindset, and then looking really at, how do we leverage the blockchain to establish digital policy, digital regulations and laws, and new, frankly, social contracts. Both sides, whether it be innovators and government, do need some citizen engagement. We need to do a check-in again with humanity and see where we're at with things. How are we responding to intense technological digestion, which is what we've been doing in the last number of months. It's gone beyond weeks now, it's been months. And I really hope that we can see some achievements in the most positive ways. I think that in order to get there, we need to be okay as policymakers, as industry people, as citizens. We need to be okay for certain failures, and we have to accept a higher level of risk. But ultimately, we need to be prioritizing transparency, and we need to ingest the exposure of vulnerability that we're seeing. I mean, systems are failing all around us right now, but that doesn't mean fail to the point of death. It means they're failing, and now we're learning, and the right response and a feedback loop is to iterate and improve. And so I think we need to be doing that. I have a project, Adrian, as you know, and you mentioned kindness, so I would be remiss not to tie them together, because they are there. The way humans responded to COVID was, how can we help? And in large way, it was, how can we help? You saw, some realize there's great market opportunity to gain and to do things, and that's wonderful. We need that. But there was also this very tremendous global response to say, what can we give you that we have to help? And all of that, frankly, exposes new supply chains that just don't exist, that haven't been thought through as open peer-to-peer supply chains. And blockchain technology is uniquely positioned to facilitate those supply chains. So Project in Kind is very much about figuring out how we leverage technology design and an influence of our values and our important policy considerations and such, in order to give benefit back to those in our world, whether it's through a community organization or a business, or through our investment vehicles, whether they're cryptocurrency vehicles or not. This is about having that conversation. The overall goal of the project is to connect businesses and people with community organizations giving support. So we're peer-to-peering global aid at a very hyper-localized kind of way 1 billion times. We want to see 1 billion exchanges of this type of value happen, and leveraging blockchain technology to do it. So it's a fun project insofar as we get to really connect that human side with the technology side, with a lot of, frankly, public policy side, because this has always been government domain in a large way, and give some power back to the people. And let's see what happens. Let's see what we could do as an experiment. So, I digress a wee bit, but I do think it's a good example of where our compliance and regulatory conversations also need to be looking. We need to be looking at how we can advance those discussions and apply them across the different verticals, and in particular, the places where it's needed right now.
Well, I'm happy, Tanya, that you brought up the global aspect. I'm going to turn it back to Jason now, who obviously is working in the global custody business. And I was going to ask you, Jason, do you feel that global custody would become a serious factor in digital assets for blockchain-based value beyond the cryptocurrency use case? And if so, how will this going to manifest?
Well, thank you, Adrian. And I just want to first say that this is a good order, because so much of what Tanya said, I think I'll be able to segue into. I want to start by saying the importance of a global conference like this, where you are actually moving the regulations. They're going to be moved globally. They're not going to be moved by one country or another. It is the collective piece where technologists and the pioneers, like everyone on this call, are going to be inching this along. Because the problem which we deal with is that currently our main regulators are looking at this from the lens of securities, which the securities law follows the great crash of 1929. So most of the securities law that we're still working with in North America is predating Turing. None of this ever comprehended non-fiat digital depreciatory, cryptocurrencies. It wasn't there. So part of the problem that's bumping in with the regulations is that they're not deriving regulation from legislation that was ever meant to equip this. So this would be akin to, 1912. There's a whole bunch of Model Ts on the road in Canada and America, and the legislators say, well, we've got to have some transportation laws around this. And they go to the railways and say, why don't you guys write all the rules for this? Yes, there's a similarity, but it simply doesn't work, and it's at cross purposes. And so bridging now to the answer of your question, in May, we saw the halving of Bitcoin. We know the bull market, which is coming here at a global level, unprecedented. And we see Morgan Stanley stepping up with Coinbase and Gemini, right? The big players moving into co-opting this element is absolutely, it's here, it's on the forefront. And the importance of the EU taking certain steps, the Canadians taking certain steps, the SEC taking certain steps, even the smaller jurisdictions nudging it forward, Bermuda, Malta, Gibraltar, it doesn't really matter. They're not going to have the capacity. It needs to be a G7 country, I believe. And that's why we've really focused on what we think can be the Canadian element of moving towards global best practices. And we focused on custody as a beginning, because if you're going to take care of other person's assets, you need really well built out regulatory compliant, and Canada has a great reputation in that sense. At the global level, we rate in the top 5 countries always in the World Corruption Index. We're a very safe, open place. On top of that, Canada has Romanian Canadians, and we have Somali Canadians, and there is a Canadian from every country on earth in Toronto. We think that this is a really good place to take these ideas and export them, as the blockchain already doesn't have borders. But what is important, especially when we see the tragedies happening in the United States right now, which are not happening on our side of the border, right? We've figured out how to live in peace and prosperity with our neighbors, in fully open, tolerant, and transparent mechanisms, where the new Canadians coming to Canada, I hope, feel welcome, because they certainly are. I was able to have dinner, I think the day after meeting Adrian with him and his family, who are new Canadians in their beautiful home in Calgary, overlooking the Rocky Mountains, having a barbecue together. This is about what and my family started Canada. I mean, we're United Empire loyalists. We were loyal to the crown when the Americans, had their tantrum 300 years ago. So anyways, the point being, as we move forward, technologies have a culture, and we know that this is a very, very serious matter. When we see the application in China, of the Communist Party of China applying their social credit system to facial recognition software, restricting people's freedoms, or we get it right on the other side, where the solutions that Tanya's talking about in kind, and we absolutely understand this in one of our divisions, moving for agricultural blockchain solutions, food traceability as an example, being able to see through a smart contract end-to-end the farmer right with the the miller or the whiskey distiller or possibly even the end consumer. This is where things are going to come. And my experience globally in the developed or the second world economies, such as Romania, post-communism, Ukraine, Kazakhstan, into Africa, the first generation of entrepreneurs there, the energy is unparalleled. I would say, I had an experience in Kazakhstan where you're just never going to be able to stop these people. But the problems that they bump into when they're at the World Corruption Index at 35%, they don't have the infrastructure to truly support these things with traditions of property law, independent judiciaries, democracy itself. Blockchain is going to enable so much of that so quickly because it's transparent. It puts everybody on the same playing field. And with those elements, we think that this would be the best thing, and Dominion's focus of bringing global blockchain solutions to multiple industries. And trying to think of this in the parallel to 1980, you had businesses. By 1990, every one of those businesses had an email and a website. That was the introduction of the internet, of information. We're now going to the internet of value, and every one of these divisions is going to need blockchain solutions going forward. At the core of those are obviously going to be the code and the important technology work that groups, like Tudor are involved with. But then the second thing is going to be the compliance, the regulation, the custody. And hopefully Canada can be well placed to finally come up with the very laws that are the gap between the laws and the regulations, because we have French and English, we have the common law and the civil code. We have, and we're non-threatening. We're a non-imperial nation. We can transposition these model, legislative and regulatory positions anywhere in the world, and no one's going to take offense to them. Adrian, again, thank you for the opportunity to speak here, and thank you for the important work that the Digital Summit is bringing to our space.
Well, thank you. As biased as I am being here in Canada, I would agree with you that the world needs more Canada. And I couldn't help by remembering at one point a discussion that I had with Tanya is how ultimately you could be a leader into something. Still, when from a population standpoint, you are a small nation, and I would think that probably you can still lead into the way of thinking, like the ones that you mentioned, Jason, like non-threatening and being inclusive and all the values that we cherish here. And having said that, I would turn it to Tudor and ask him a question that probably would come also to you, Jason and Tanya, as we're getting close to the event. If you would have a magic wand that gave you all the required authority, what blockchain-based laws and regulations would you rescind, and what would you enact?
So I think I'm gonna. That's a really, really good question, because it sprung to my mind what I'm hearing from both the startups I have worked and I'm working with as a lawyer, but also the members of the Romanian Fintech Association. It's this idea, especially if you're in the B2B space. It's this idea that if you want to build something that is going to reach a big number of users, a big number of customers, you need to have that trust that users and customers bestow upon you when they decide to use your service. I think in the space of blockchain, we need, because it's still something that many view as a concept. It's for the majority of people, it's something that they don't understand. And in order for them to use something a product, to use the solution that the company is putting on the market, and which promotes itself as being a blockchain-based solution, they need to basically be able to trust that solution. And to that end, I think a lot of work, building on what both Tanya and Jason mentioned, a lot of work needs to be done in terms of providing some standards or some best practices on a global level. Again, that's a very, very good point and a very important point. Standards related to what the security of a system means, what kind of a system you can trust when you're basically using its services, what kind of stamp of approval, if the case is needed. So I would focus on maybe looking a little bit more into what kind of regulation you can come with that would allow the users and the larger market and the small individual that is looking to whether to use a solution which is blockchain based, how you can help that user make that decision and know that if he's using a particular solution, that solution has been approved or is a solution which is considered to be industry standard in some way. So I would focus on regulation that addresses this problem of security of systems, of resilience of systems, because I think those are the aspects that are going to bring more people into using blockchain-based solutions.
Tanya, final thoughts on having a magic wand, especially since you're influencing your crafting policies. What are your thoughts on it?
It's such a huge question. You know, look, we're seeing the failure of siloing. It's happening everywhere. We've over-siloed systems because as humans, we like to oversimplify complexity. It's like this really strange obsession. We want everything quick, easy, 3 seconds, 3 clicks. And I think technology has absolutely created this obsessive, impatient tendency in those of us that use it frequently. We want it now. We don't want to wait. We don't want to hear more questions. We don't read EULAs. You know, we don't read terms and like nobody cares because nobody has time. The problem is when you forfeit the care and the critical thinking and the opportunity to participate in your democracy, in your system, you forfeit your power. So we've got to get back to a balance. And I think we've given up a lot to our own detriment collectively, globally. A lot of big companies know a lot about us, make a lot of money from us, you know, run the system, design the system. The technology design itself is influenced by their priorities, not necessarily ours as the common citizen of the world, let's say. So if we expect government to create policies and regulations, then we need to restart a lot. You know, the World Economic Forum calls it the Great Reset. That was last week's announcement, the Great Reset. So we can't unknow what we know now. And it would be a serious fool's mistake to try to unknow what we know now. We now know through COVID as a blessing, the real fail points. And their fail points against human rights, their fail points against democracy, their fail points against transparency and security in the most broadest term. I mean, you can think of security of people, security, access to health, access to education, whatever you want. We can't unknow that, nor should we try. So we know what we know. If I had my way, I think it's time to create a digital human rights agreement globally. I think that's number one. Number two, I think it's time to create a global governance agreement where citizens have a say. And I think we leverage digital technologies to do it. And I also think it's time to reconsider what are those systems that are going to drive us toward a shared vision of progress together. I mean, we've heard a lot about failed capitalism, but I mean, we designed the system. So we can call it a failure, or we can say it's time for an upgrade. And in our case, I would say it's quite likely most blockchain innovators, I mean, keep in mind this spurred its whole growth pattern after the last financial collapse. So there's a whole bunch of, you know, libertarian democracy baked into our technology space. But I would say there's probably quite a few that would say it's time to reconvene the conversation and leverage the power of the peers to do it. So I absolutely insist on that. I could go
Jason.
today. Sorry, Adrian.
Jason, the final 30 seconds on the magic wand in context of you being a former MLA.
Well, I think it would, I mirror what I said to the Senate Committee on Banking and Finance in 2014. I'd recognize Bitcoin just because it's the first one as a currency, and I'd have the Canadian government legislate wallets. And those wallets could have our entire taxation system on them. And I'd help the developing world do the same thing so that they moved into inflation, into deflationary-based currencies digitally supplied, as opposed to the inflationary-based ones that we have right now, and the current crisis that we're coming into with the IMF calling on special drawing rights because the developing world, their bonds are going to very quickly here run into a period of hyperinflation because the liquidity in the bond market is not going to survive COVID. That's my answer. So consistent from 6 years ago. Thank you, Adrian.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you each and every single one of you. Thank you. And please stay with us on VBS.live for the rest of the day and tomorrow. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye.